Well, good morning, Grace Church. My name is Taylor Brown. I serve on staff as the pastor of youth ministries, and I want to thank you. So glad you're joining us today, whether you're here in person or online. Hello, we're glad you're here. A few weeks ago, I received the best Christmas gift, or one of the best Christmas gifts I think I've ever gotten. Thanks to my wife, Elisa, she orchestrated a trip for me and a couple of friends to go to Philadelphia to see the Philadelphia Eagles play live in person. Yeah! Oh, hold your booze, please. Disrespect. Jealousy's a sin too. So I got to see for the first time in person my beloved Philadelphia Eagles play. If you're confused, if you need some clarification, these are the same Eagles that are playing today in the NFC Championship game. These are the same Eagles that will hopefully win today and play in the Super Bowl 2 weeks from now. So, for clarification, sorry, Dallas fans, Giants fans, Tampa fans, Dolphin fans, and so on. I apologize. Some of you are praying they lose, so this guy shuts up about the Eagles. So I got to see him for the first time in person, and I learned a few things on my trip to Philadelphia. First one is this: it's cold. And I don't mean like Florida cold, I mean it's cold. Puffy jackets, a beanie, gloves are all necessities. I learned something else. Eagles fans boo really loud. Like really, really loud. I apologize to Giants players and Giants fans on behalf of some of the things I heard. Third thing is this. I learned that it costs $25 for a cheesesteak and a drink inside the stadium. I wish I was kidding. Yeah, wish I was kidding. I learned a lot on my trip. And here's what was different. See, I've seen the Eagles play before. I've seen them as a road team in Tampa and in Miami. But this time, I got to experience it being part of the home team. And I had heard for years. I remember being an 11-year-old kid watching them on TV, just dreaming of the day that I would get to go and see a game in person. Instead of just hearing about how great it was to be at the Link, I finally got to be there and see it for myself. I got to see my breath in the cold. I got to hear the groans from every bad play and the cheers from every good play. I got to smell and hold a cheesesteak that cost me $25 to purchase. It was marvelous. It was fantastic. And here's what I know. This is true for me about my Eagles game experience, but also this is like a thing that's true about life in general. Things change when you see it for yourself. See, it was one thing to hear about how amazing the environment is at the Link, but it was another thing to see it for myself. And the same is true for you and for me when it comes to our lives, and especially when it comes to our faith. That's why here at Grace Church, we do a lot of things to help you experience it, because sometimes you just got to see it for yourself. That's why we encourage students, our middle and high schoolers in our youth ministry. We encourage them to have a firsthand faith. Not a secondhand faith that's borrowed from somebody else, but a firsthand faith that they experience and own themselves. That's why we encourage you all to get up and serve in some area in our church or in our community, so you can see for yourself the impact that serving others has. That's why our recovery ministry is so unashamed in the fact that we share our stories of our strength, experience, and power and hope in Jesus through testimonies. And we share about the freedom that we've found from addictions, afflictions, and compulsive behaviors, because we want people to experience it for themselves, because things change when you see it for yourself. And that same principle, that same idea, brings us to the next part of our story of Nehemiah. So if you haven't been with us, 2 weeks ago we kicked off a series called Rebuild. We've been slowly walking through the book of Nehemiah. We're going to do this for a few months. And we've learned some important things about Nehemiah and his story over the past couple of weeks. We learned that Nehemiah was a part of a people that had been exiled from Jerusalem. They'd been exiled to Babylon. And thanks to a conquest from King Nebuchadnezzar, the city of Jerusalem lay in ruins. The city was destroyed. And so Nehemiah is miles away now in Persia. And he hears news that God's people are back in Jerusalem and they're in trouble. He hears the news that the city has been destroyed. And as we learned a couple weeks ago, when Nehemiah hears this news, he immediately is filled with sorrow and grief and sadness, and he has this moment of lament, and he cries out to God. And then we learned last week that Nehemiah sort of takes on this purpose that God has given him to rebuild the walls. And so he goes to the Persian king, and he gets permission from the king to go to Jerusalem to help this amazing mission to rebuild the walls. So now we enter this part of the story where Nehemiah, he has this clear purpose. He gets permission from the king to go. And what will happen next? After all, the series is called Rebuild, so, what's going to happen to the walls? Like, what's the next step for Nehemiah to rebuild? A trip to Home Depot is out of the question during these times. So what happens next? Well, I want to invite actually a student from our youth ministry, Alec, to make his way up here. And Alec's going to read for us the text that we're going to be looking at today. You can also find this in the message notes that are a part of the Grace Church app if you want to follow along that way. But Alec's going to read it for us. Can we thank God for Alec for being here today? Can we welcome him? Yeah.
I went to Jerusalem, and after staying there 3 days, I set out during the night with a few others. I had not told anyone what my God had put in my heart to do for Jerusalem. There were no mounts with me except the one I was riding on. By night, I went out through the valley gate towards the Jackal Well and the Dung Gate, examining the walls of Jerusalem, which had been broken down, and its gates, which had been destroyed by fire. Then I moved on toward the Fountain Gate and the King's Pool. But there was not enough room for my mount to get through, so I went up the valley by night, examining the wall. Finally, I turned back and re-entered through the valley gate.
Awesome. We thank God for Alec. Alec, thank you, sir. Appreciate it. So, reading this, we see what Nehemiah's next move was. And I'm going to be honest. I know you guys. If I weren't a pastor and I were sitting there, I'd feel the same way. In a series called Rebuild, we just want to get rebuilding. Like if I'm you, I'm like, okay, the first 2 weeks of this series, okay, I know that God's the firm foundation. I know that I need to stay prayerfully alert. But what's the 5-step plan now for rebuilding my life? Because I want that. I want the YouTube video. I want the article. Tell me how to do it. Just give me the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And Nehemiah's next move is so countercultural to that, it's amazing. Because Nehemiah doesn't grab his tools and start on the wall. No, the next thing Nehemiah does is examine the ruins. He takes this night ride, this trip, and he walks around the city, walks around and examines the walls. And I can't help but just question or raise the possibility that maybe the next step for us in our rebuild of our own heart, mind, and soul, maybe the next step for us is the same idea of this careful examination. In fact, that word in Hebrew, that examine word, it translates to sabar. And it's this idea that means to carefully look at and wait. There's a patience with this word examine. A careful, strategic, honest look at what is in front of them. That's what Nehemiah does. And I think we'd agree that this examining step, it's two things. The first thing is it's necessary. It's necessary, it's important, it's foundational to know what the current damage, what the current ruins look like before we can go in and keep rebuilding them ourselves. I mean, think about your insurance company. Or maybe you don't want to, but humor me for a moment. Think about insurance companies. The first thing they do is send somebody out to what? To look at the damage. They assess the damage. They examine what's wrong. They have to do this crucial step before they can release any funds or talk about what's next so you can get rebuilding. And the same thing is true in this case for Nehemiah, and it can be true for our lives too. We need this examination. We need this careful look inward at how is it with our heart, mind, and soul before we can move forward rebuilding. And just as necessary as this examination work is, there's a second thing that's also true as well, and it's this. It's painful. It's painful. It's not always easy looking inward at the good, bad, and ugly that we have. For example, I think this is why I'm really good at letting people know what they need rebuilt in them. I can spot that from a mile away. I could be a contractor in that, quite honestly. But because it's painful, I don't like looking inward at myself at the ways that I need rebuilt. I'd rather avoid that. I'd rather walk around that. I'd rather ignore that. I'd rather do a whole lot of things other than look inside at the broken, damaged, not so great parts of me and figure out what needs rebuilt. And I'm sure I'm not alone in that. This is painful work. This hurts sometimes. I think that's why we sometimes live in a distracted world too. Because sometimes it's just easier to scroll and like and watch and binge watch and all these other things than to really have this examination work where we welcome God in and look at what's going on inside of us. But here's what we can hold on to in the midst of all this as we dive in today, this truth. God is with us. We're not too far removed from Christmas to remember that idea. We talk about Emmanuel, God being with us a lot at Christmas time, but that's just not a Christmas time truth. That's an everyday truth, that God is with us. Maybe you need that reminder today that God is with you. He's with you in the good, he's with you in the bad, he's with you in the ugly, he's with you in everything, and he's with you in this work of inner examination as well. So to help us with this holy work of examination today, I want to invite us to take a look at 3 specific things that Nehemiah does of the scripture we just read. 3 things that he does and what that means for us today. So we're going to look at these for the rest of our time together. First thing is this. Nehemiah says, I went to Jerusalem. Say that with me. Ready, set, go. I went to Jerusalem. And after staying there 3 days, I set out during the night with a few others. So the first thing Nehemiah did was to go to Jerusalem. Now, here's what you need to understand. This was not like a 20-minute drive, okay? The capital of Persia, which is Susa, was around 900 miles away from Jerusalem. This was a long trip. Scholars believe that it probably took Nehemiah about 3 months to complete this journey from Susa to Jerusalem. And so this is not like a around-the-corner kind of thing. Nehemiah, this took dedication. So Nehemiah goes to Jerusalem. Now, at this point, Nehemiah had only heard about what happened. He hadn't experienced it for himself. So this going to Jerusalem, it's this moment where Nehemiah transfers from only hearing about something secondhand to seeing it for himself firsthand. And as we know, as I said before, things change when we see it for ourselves. So the text doesn't pick up on this in this instance, but I want to go back to Nehemiah 1 for a moment. Just think back. Think back to when Nehemiah heard the news that the city had been destroyed. Do you remember how he reacted? He mourned. He grieved, he cried out, he lamented. There's obviously this deep emotional connection, this deep feeling of sadness and grief that Nehemiah carried just hearing the news. Now, can you imagine how he felt when he made his way there and saw the city for himself? He had to have been overcome with emotion, overcome with grief at the city that he loved, of seeing it laying in ruins. In fact, we've experienced this ourselves. So some of you might not know this, but we have disaster response teams that are actually staying here at Grace Church. There's a shower trailer and a bathroom trailer and a bunk trailer over in our Family Center parking lot. So we've been hosting teams. We're going to host teams all year to help rebuild from Hurricane Ian. And it's sort of the same sentiment that we hear from a lot of these teams that come, and when they come in, when they serve at Pondella or one of the beaches or wherever, we hear this idea from them. They say, it's one thing, like I've heard about this on the news, but they say it's another thing seeing this in person. It's just another level. I actually experienced this myself, not with a hurricane, but actually on a trip that I took to Esteli, Nicaragua. We have amazing mission partners in Nicaragua. These are pastors that lead local ministry there, and we just do what we can to just help empower them with leadership training and other resources they need. And so we got to visit one of our pastors. He lives kind of near, his ministry's kind of near this site that we have, this community known as La Cruz. It's a community of people that actually live right next to the Esteli dump. And so you can see pictures of the dump here. And there's this community that lives right next to and really in the dump. They work there every day. Their children and them are kind of working through the trash heaps and playing on the trash heaps. And it's been for generations this community has lived there. So for years I had heard about this community, heard about La Cruz, heard about the dump, heard about everything. And then I finally had the chance to go there. I finally had the chance to go see it for myself. And can I tell you that as the car pulled up and I walked up to La Cruz and the dump, my senses went into overdrive. All I could see were trash heaps and piles. And I saw young kids, probably as old, even some as young as my daughter Gemma is now, playing in the trash piles. I smelled just every foul odor that you can imagine all mixed together. All I could hear was just the buzzing of flies around me in the midst of conversation. I felt them land on my head and crawl. And the second I experienced La Cruz for myself, my heart broke and my love grew for that community that lives there in a way that it never would have just hearing about it here in Cape Coral. See, experience is a catalyst for transformation. And the same is true for us. And when it comes to looking inward, this examination work of experiencing the ruins for ourselves. So what does this mean for us? Here's what this means for us. It means that we have to be willing to go there. We got to be willing to go there, whether it be an outside location that we need to go and visit somebody, or going there in the parts of our soul, heart, and mind that we know we need to examine. We need to be willing to go there. It can be scary, absolutely. But we have to be willing to enter into that and go there for ourselves so we can see it. Here's the second thing Nehemiah did. He went to Jerusalem, but here's another thing he did. He said, I had not told anyone what my God had put in my heart to do for Jerusalem. Read the statement in red for me. I had not told anyone. Ready, set, go. I had not told anyone. It says there were no mounts with me except the one I was riding on. So Nehemiah, he does this amazing thing, and it's this very specific thing that's included in here. It makes a note to say that Nehemiah didn't tell anybody what he was doing. Now, seems kind of countercultural in today's world, right? Because thanks to social media, we tell a lot of people a lot of things, right? Like we tell people about what we ate for lunch. We tell people about where we like to vacation. We tell people like what our dog did 10 minutes ago. We tell people who we're rooting for in the Super Bowl, go Birds. And we even do silly things. Like I was literally, as I'm writing this list from scrolling my Facebook feed, like we even tell people what Disney princess or Yellowstone character we are from a BuzzFeed quiz, right? Like it's all over the map, right? Like we tell a lot of people a lot of things. But there's some wisdom, I think, in Nehemiah's example of not sharing right away. And I think Nehemiah's wisdom comes because Nehemiah knows the importance of timing. Like, did you know that there's a wrong time to say the right thing? And did you know that there's a bad time to say a good thing? See, Nehemiah knows the wisdom of timing. And at that moment, he knew at that moment, maybe this wasn't something that he should just absolutely share with everyone. Because spoiler alert, hate to ruin the story for you, you're going to hear about it next week, but Nehemiah does share this with a lot of people. He does end up sharing this huge vision, this huge purpose, this huge thing that God has given him. But at that moment in time, Nehemiah's wisdom told him that he needed to just keep this between him, God, and it says a few others that were with him. I can't help, when I read the example from Nehemiah, I can't help but often think of the times that I have shared something God has given me too quickly and too haphazardly, before I've even really gotten a chance to sit with God and think about it, just like Nehemiah did. You know, I think about the story in the Old Testament we read in Genesis, first book of the Bible. We read about Joseph. You remember Joseph, the guy with the beautiful coat that his dad gave him? Well, if you remember how Joseph's story kind of kicks off, Joseph has this dream. And instead of like sitting with God and considering, God, what did that dream really mean? What are you trying to tell me? Joseph just kind of haphazardly and quickly told his brothers about this dream. You remember this? He's like, guys, I had the as they're eating their Cinnamon Toast Crunch. He's like, I had the craziest dream last night. I dreamt that you guys were worshiping me. Boom, wild, right? And this sort of kicks off the trouble that Joseph experiences in his life, right? It makes his brothers really ticked off at him. I can't help but think, what if Joseph of the Old Testament practiced the example that we see of Mary in the New Testament? Do you remember what Mary did when the angel visits her, tells her this amazing news? She's going to be the mother of God's son. She pondered these things in her heart. I can't help but wonder how many times in my own life I've been Joseph, Old Testament Joseph instead of New Testament Mary, where I just quickly share things when there's wisdom in sitting with God and pondering these things in our heart with him. So here's what this means for us today. I think it means that we have to be willing to go there, yes, but we also have to be willing to invite God in with us, invite God in first. So instead of inviting our friends in or other people in or mentors in or Google in to the equation, let's invite God in first and sit with him and ponder these things in our heart. So here's the third thing Nehemiah does. The third lesson I think we can learn by this. So it says, by night, I went out through the valley gate. Say, I went out through the valley gate. Ready, set, go. I went out through the valley gate, toward the jackal well and the dung gate, examining the walls of Jerusalem, which had been broken down and its gates, which had been destroyed by fire. And then Nehemiah describes, you can see it there. He describes this kind of counterclockwise movement. He comes out the west side of the walls toward the valley gate. He moves counterclockwise and he re-enters back in the valley gate. And it specifically states the valley gate twice. So this means in Bible code, like when this is written like this, it means, hey, pay attention to the valley gate, because that's a detail that matters. So Nehemiah, he goes out the valley gate, and this actually overlooks a couple of valleys during that time, the Hinnom Valley and the Kidron Valley, which are actually valleys where notable pagan or evil practices occurred in those times. And so Nehemiah goes out this valley gate, kind of overlooking these valleys, and scholars say that the reason he went out this way is because he would have like one of the best views of the walls that he could possibly have. Like he was going to get a real and honest look at the damage that he was facing. And I can't help but think there's some beautiful symbolism here in this picture that Nehemiah gives us. So Nehemiah, going out at night, in the shadow of the valleys, gets this honest, open examination and assessment of the walls. And step by step, probably feeling a lot of emotion as he does this, makes his way around the walls, back through the valley gate, and exits. Now getting this full picture of what the rebuild looks like. I think there's symbolism here about us examining our ruins in the shadow of the valleys that we've experienced in our life. See, these valleys, they often, are associated with things like submission and maybe struggle too. And there's something beautiful about Nehemiah examining the ruins in the light of the night, in the shadow of the valley down below. Because there's something transforming that happens when we go through the valley. God does not cause our pain in the valley. I want you to hear me, but here's the beautiful thing. God can redeem our pain in the valley. God redeems it. It's one of the amazing things I love about God is he has a redeeming power to take things that are evil and broken and painful and tragic, and yet he somehow amazingly turns them into something masterful, beautiful, redeemable, of value. It's the thing I love most about God, honestly. And this redeeming work that happens is what we experience when we travel through the valley. Because God does not leave us. He does not leave us, friends. And as Psalm 23 reminds us, we don't have to live in the valley. We don't camp out in the valley, but we do walk through the valley. And so when we put all these ideas together, all these examples of Nehemiah and what that means for us today, here's what I think it is. Are you ready? Rebuilding begins when I'm willing to enter the valley of truth. Let's read it together. Rebuilding begins when I am willing to enter the valley of truth. So if we want to really begin this rebuild, put the tools down for a moment, and instead, would you be willing to enter the valley of truth? Where you take this honest look at you and yourself and the ruins of your life. You ask questions like, how is it with my heart, mind, and soul today? Or what are the ruins of my life? Or what is broken in me that I need God's restoring, redeeming power to fix? It's asking those questions. And is it painful? Can it be painful? Yeah, it can. I'm not going to deny that. But do you know what else is painful? It's living in the other valley, the valley that's opposite of the valley of truth. It's living in the valley of denial. Because just as painful as walking through the valley of the truth is living in the valley of denial, and only one valley leads to healing. So what's more painful than addressing it? I'd say it's not addressing it is more painful. Maybe for you this is a new way, a new valley to enter down, a new place to go. See, for even in Nehemiah's story, we're going to see as we walk through the story about a guy named Ezra. And Ezra was this guy who was in Jerusalem trying to rebuild with one focus and one way. And then Nehemiah comes along and has another focus and a new way to go about rebuilding. And so maybe just like Ezra experienced with Nehemiah's invitation, maybe you can consider a new way today. A new way of rebuilding that encourages you to enter into the valley of truth so that you experience transformation for yourself now through God's healing power and inspiration for others later. That's the beautiful thing about this. There's a pastor and author, Alan Redpath, who describes this. I love this about Nehemiah's story. He says this: "Let us learn this lesson from Nehemiah. You never lighten the load unless first you have felt the pressure in your own soul. You are never used of God to bring blessing until God has what? Opened your eyes and made you see things as they are." That's why I love our recovery ministry and the fact that they will share stories of this very thing. See, the Valley of Truth moments for our recovery community, our friends in the recovery world, they would tell you that it's the fourth step. It's to make a searching and fearless more inventory of themselves. Where you look inward and you ask God, you invite him into this valley of truth and go, God, what is it about me that's in ruins? And that, along with the fifth step, which is to share with God, themselves, and someone else the exact nature of their wrongs, there's this amazing healing thing that happens in the soul. Are these steps hard? Absolutely. But are they healing and bring transformation? Absolutely. It's a beautiful thing. And as we enter into the valley of truth, we welcome God's presence and God's power because God knows us. God knows you. You're not a stranger to him. Even if God's a stranger to you, you're not a stranger to him. He knows you. He's with you. And there's nobody else that understood this better, I think, than King David. We can read about King David's life in the Old Testament. His life, quite honestly, would make a pretty good Netflix series, I think. Lots of action, twists and turns, scandal. It's got the whole 9 yards. And so David actually writes down a lot of his, sort of his thoughts, feelings, if you will, his prayers in the book of Psalms. And we can read specifically in Psalm 139 about how deeply David understood this idea that God knows him, that God knows him personally. He begins Psalm 139 this way. He says, "You have searched me, Lord, and you know me. You know when I sit and when I rise. You perceive my thoughts from afar. You discern my going out and my lying down. You are familiar with all my ways. Before a word is on my tongue, you, Lord, know it completely." See, David talks about this grand nature that God knows of us. He knows our thoughts. He knows where we are. He knows when we sit, when we rise. He knows us. He knows you. But then as David continues on writing in the psalm, we see this other revelation that happens. And it's this, that even though God knows everything about David, David doesn't know everything about himself. And then David prays and writes this beautiful, bold prayer in verses 23 and 24. David writes, "Search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me and lead me in the way everlasting." So David boldly proclaims, "Search me and test me, know my anxious thoughts, point out any offensive way in me and lead me in life everlasting." It's this bold, incredible prayer. And this prayer is said with the implication that there are things that David does not know about himself. Truth that is hidden in David that David does not know about himself, but that God does. And he prays this prayer to God, and can I tell you, this is a bold prayer because God will answer it. At least, see, I know he did in my life. So in my last year when I first started counseling, in the first few sessions, my therapist shared these verses with me. And he gave me the challenge to say these verses every night, to read Psalm 139, 23, and 24 every night, and to listen to what it is that God wanted to speak to me, to see what it is that God wanted to point out in me. And I never forget him saying, he goes, Taylor, this is a dangerous prayer because God answers this more than once. And can I tell you, friends, I've found God's faithfulness in every time that he answers this prayer for me. Every time I'm willing to enter into the valley of truth by praying this prayer, and I listen, God answers it. He's shown me the ways as a husband and father and pastor and son and coworker and friend that I can love more like Jesus in my life. He's pointed out those things to me. He's shown me the incredible blessings that I have, the truth behind the blessings that I have, and that I can be grateful for so much in life. He's pointed out ways that I'm still stuck in the past. He's pointed out old scripts that are lies that I can officially toss away, that I can no longer hang on to. He's pointed out insecurities in me when it comes to leadership that are crippling doubt, that leads to crippling doubt in the way that I lead other people. And every single time, he's faithful and he's with me. So what about you today? Are you ready to try a new way that Nehemiah shows us? Are you ready and willing to enter into the valley of truth so that you can get a good look at the ruins and know when your rebuild might begin? Because sometimes we just got to see it for ourselves. So at this time, I want you to grab this card, if you don't mind. Go ahead and grab this card. You should have got it when you walked in. It's a white card. It's got Psalm 139, 23 and 24 at the top. And then beneath it, it has some lines. And our worship team's getting ready to sing over you in just a moment. And during this first song that they sing over you, I want to invite you to remain seated. And I want you to read these verses at the top of this card. And I want you to pray the prayer that David prayed right here and say, God, show me me. I want to invite you to write down the space below, what is it that God shows you? As you enter into the valley of truth, what is God speaking to you? What is God saying to you in these moments? What truth is he revealing about you in your life? And as our worship team sings this song over us about us looking to God, I invite you to live that out, not through singing right now, but to do just this very practice of looking to God and welcoming him in to the valley of truth for you. Go ahead, our worship team is going to lead us.